I survived 18 months of hell during the withdrawal in Kabul only to return to Virginia and find my smart key disabled. Inside, my useless brother was wearing my bathrobe and drinking my vintage wine. My parents coolly announced they had transferred my title to him because he needed a fresh start. They forgot my job in the military is strategic intelligence analysis, and I never enter a battle without a plan B. My name is Elena. Standing outside the arrivals terminal at Dulles International Airport, I took my first breath of Virginia air in 18 months. It smelled of exhaust and humidity, but to me, it was the sweetest perfume on earth. I was 32 years old, and my body felt twice that age. The last year and a half as a private military contractor in Kabul had been a blur of high-stakes intelligence analysis, mortar sirens, and the constant grinding dust that coated the back of my throat. I adjusted the strap of my tactical duffel bag, my shoulders aching. All I could think about was my sanctuary, my penthouse in Arlington. I had spent 10 years eating terrible food and missing every major holiday to save enough cash to buy it outright. No mortgage, no debt. Just quiet. I took an Uber to my building, the anticipation buzzing in my fingertips. I walked up to the secure glass doors and tapped my key fob against the reader. The light flashed red. I frowned and tried again. Red. I punched in my personal access code. Access denied. The concierge, a man named Gary whom I had tipped generously every Christmas, refused to meet my eyes. He shifted uncomfortably behind the marble desk. "Gary, the system is glitching," I said, my voice raspy from the flight. "Let me up." I can't do that, Ms. Elena," Gary said, looking at his computer screen as if it were the most interesting thing in the world. The ownership records were updated 3 weeks ago. The current owner is Mr. Julian. My blood ran cold. Julian. My brother before Gary could answer. The elevator dinged. The doors slid open and my stomach dropped. Julian strolled out, wearing a designer jacket that I knew he could not afford. Hanging on his arm was a woman who looked like she had stepped directly out of an Instagram filter. Julian stopped when he saw me. He did not look happy. He looked annoyed. "Elena." Julian smirked, looking me up and down. "You look rough. I thought you were extending your contract. What are you doing in my apartment?" "Julian," I asked, my voice low and dangerous. "Our apartment," he corrected, breezing past me toward the exit. "Mom and Dad handled it. Don't make a scene. Elena, it is embarrassing." I watched him leave, my hands trembling. I pulled out my phone and dialed my father. He answered on the second ring, put on speakerphone with my mother. "Dad, why is Julian listed as the owner of my home?" I demanded. "Elena, honey, calm down." My mother's voice floated through the line, sickeningly sweet. "We used the power of attorney you signed before you deployed. Julian is getting married soon. He needs the asset to show his fiancé's family that he has stability. You know how fragile his ego is." "You stole my house," I said, the shock making me breathless. "I paid for that place with blood money." "Oh, stop being dramatic," my father snapped. "You have the military to take care of you. You are the big sister. You should be happy to sacrifice for him. It is just a title transfer. We can discuss this when you are less emotional." They hung up. I stood there for a moment, the betrayal cutting deeper than any shrapnel. They thought I was just a soldier who followed orders. They forgot I was an analyst. I always had a contingency. I waited until nightfall. I knew Julian. He would be out celebrating his stolen success. I slipped into the building through the service entrance when a delivery guy walked out. I went to the third-floor hallway, to a fake fire hose panel I had installed myself 2 years ago. I pried it open. The spare key was still there. I let myself into the penthouse. The smell hit me instantly. Stale cigarette smoke and pepperoni. My pristine white Italian leather sofa was stained with red wine. There were scratches on the hardwood floor. He had turned my sanctuary into a frat house. I ignored the mess and went straight to the master bedroom. I pushed aside the heavy dresser, something Julian would never have the strength or work ethic to move, and revealed the wall safe. My fingers flew over the keypad. The light turned green. Inside, the blue folder was untouched. I grabbed it and left, my heart pounding against my ribs. An hour later, I sat on the lumpy bed of a Motel 6 5 miles away. The room smelled of bleach and despair. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, hot and angry. My own family had gutted me while I was serving my country. But as I opened the blue folder, the tears stopped. My eyes scanned the document on top. It was a revocable living trust agreement named the Phoenix Trust. My parents had used the power of attorney to sign for Elena the individual. But the apartment did not belong to Elena the individual. It belonged to the trust. I ran my finger over the clause regarding the trustee's authority. Without my signature as the trustee, their transfer was not just invalid, it was mortgage fraud. I closed the folder. The sadness in my chest evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. They wanted a war, I would give them one. I sat on the edge of the motel bed, the cheap polyester comforter scratching my skin, and stared at the documents spread out before me. The dim, yellow light of the bedside lamp flickered, casting long shadows that looked like the ghosts of my past. This betrayal did not start today. It did not start when they changed the locks. It started 30 years ago. In the psychology of dysfunctional families, there are two roles: the golden child and the scapegoat. Julian was the golden child. I was the scapegoat. I remembered the day Julian turned 16. My parents bought him a brand new cherry red convertible. He had failed 3 classes that semester and had been suspended for smoking weed in the boys' bathroom. I stood in the driveway, clutching my report card which showed straight A's, and watched him rev the engine. Isn't it wonderful? Elena, my mother had asked, beaming at him. He needs confidence. This car will give him drive. What about my college fund? I had asked quietly. Oh, Elena, you are smart, my father had replied, dismissing me with a wave of his hand. You can get scholarships. Julian needs our help. So I worked double shifts at a diner to pay for my tuition while Julian crashed his car 3 months later. That was the pattern. Julian failed, and I paid. When he tried to launch a cryptocurrency mining business that was clearly a pyramid scheme, I was the one guilt-tripped into bailing him out with $5,000 of my hazardous duty pay. When he wanted to open a vegan burger joint, despite never cooking a meal in his life, my parents begged me to invest $10,000 because this time is different. It was never different. I looked down at the power of attorney document in my hands. I remembered the night I signed it. It was 2 days before I deployed to Kabul. We were sitting at the kitchen table. My mother was crying, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. We just worry so much, Elena, she had sobbed, grabbing my hand. If something happens to you over there, God forbid, we need to be able to handle your affairs. Insurance, medical decisions. Please, don't leave us helpless if you die. I had signed it because I was a soldier preparing for war, and the thought of my parents struggling with paperwork while grieving my death broke my heart. They played on my love to rob me. They did not see me as a daughter. They saw me as an insurance policy. They saw me as a resource to be harvested to feed Julian's ego. To them, my money was family money, and family money belonged to Julian. But they underestimated my paranoia. My eyes shifted to the Phoenix Trust document. Before I deployed, I had a long conversation with a jagged scar of a lawyer named Marcus. I told him I wanted to protect my assets. We moved the deed of the penthouse into a revocable living trust. Legally. Elena did not own the apartment. The Phoenix Trust owned it. This was the trap I had unknowingly set for them. The power of attorney I gave my parents allowed them to act as Elena the individual. It did not grant them powers as trustee of the Phoenix Trust. In order to sell or transfer the apartment, they needed the signature of the trustee. Me. I pulled the land registry transfer document out of the pile I had stolen from the safe. My breath hitched. There, on the bottom line, was a signature. Elena Vance, trustee. I did not sign that. I was 7,000 miles away in a bunker in Germany for a layover on that specific date. I looked closely at the ink. The loops on the E were too round. The slant was wrong. It was a good attempt, likely practiced, but it was a forgery. My father had likely sat at my desk, practicing my signature over and over, justifying it to himself the whole time. It's for the family, he probably whispered to himself. Elena wouldn't mind. She has plenty. A cold, hard smile touched my lips. If they had just used the power of attorney to drain my checking account, it would have been a civil matter. It would have been a messy family lawsuit. But this was different. By forging my signature as a trustee on a federal lending document to secure a mortgage, they had crossed a line they could not uncross. This was no longer a domestic dispute. This was forgery. This was bank fraud. This was a felony punishable by up to 30 years in federal prison. You wanted the house? Julian, I whispered to the empty, musty room. You just bought yourself a prison cell. The office of Stratton and Associates smelled of old mahogany and expensive cologne. It was a stark contrast to the dust of Kabul, but the tension in my chest felt familiar. I sat across from Marcus, a man I had trusted with my life during a particularly bad ambush in the Korangal Valley. Now, he was one of the sharpest real estate attorneys in D.C., trading his rifle for a fountain pen. Marcus slid the file across the polished desk, his face grim. You were right, Marcus said, tapping the paper with his index finger. It is not just a fraudulent title transfer. It is mortgage fraud. High-level bank fraud. 2 weeks after they forged your signature to move the deed out of the trust, they took out a home equity line of credit. How much? I asked, keeping my voice steady. $500,000. Marcus replied. They claimed it was for renovations to increase the property value, but I pulled the transaction records. The money did not go to contractors. It went into a generic crypto exchange platform. I leaned back in the leather chair. $500,000. They had stolen my home, and then they had stripped it of its equity to fund Julian's gambling addiction disguised as investing. We can file an injunction today, Marcus said, leaning forward. We can have the sheriff throw him out by Friday. No, I said, shaking my head. If I sue now, they will play the victim. They will say it was a family misunderstanding, that they intended to pay me back. I need them to dig the hole so deep they can never climb out. I spent the next 3 days in the shadows. I treated Julian like a high-value target. I monitored his social media feeds. His Instagram was a nauseating display of unearned wealth. He posted a photo of himself on my balcony, holding a glass of my wine, with the caption, "Started from the bottom. Now we here." Self-made millionaire mindset. He was wearing a Rolex I knew he had bought on credit. I decided to increase the pressure. I bought a burner phone and called the risk management department of the bank that had issued the fraudulent loan. I did not give my name. I am calling to report a potential default risk on the property at Arlington Boulevard, I said into the receiver, distorting my voice slightly. The borrower is leveraging funds for high-risk cryptocurrency speculation, not renovation. Check the withdrawal patterns. I hung up before they could ask questions. The seed was planted. The bank would start looking. Then came the phone call that nearly made me lose my composure. It was my mother. Elena, she said, her tone brisk and demanding. The Homeowners Association called. The monthly fee is overdue. Since the utility accounts are still technically linked to your old email, you need to pay it. I gripped the phone so hard the plastic creaked. You stole my house. Took a $500,000 loan against it, and you want me to pay the HOA fee. Oh, stop it, she scoffed. Julian is busy with his investments. He is going to be very rich soon, and he will pay you back triple. But right now, cash flow is tight. Do not be petty. Elena, it is the least you can do after scaring us by disappearing into a war zone. Fine, I said, my voice icy. I will pay it. I hung up and opened my banking app. I transferred the $600 for the fee. But in the memo line, where the transaction would be permanently recorded on both bank statements, I typed payment of HOA fees on behalf of squatter Julian and fraudulent owners. It was a digital breadcrumb, evidence that I never accepted their ownership. Later that night, the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. I was monitoring a gambling forum where Julian used the handle KingJules88. He posted a frantic message in a private thread I had hacked into. Need liquidity fast? Bookie is breathing down my neck. Selling the penthouse next week. Cash offers only. Quick close. My eyes narrowed. He was going to sell the apartment and vanish with the cash before the bank realized the fraud. I could not wait any longer. The trap had to be sprung now. It is truly a marvel how someone can be so arrogant yet so technologically illiterate. Julian had gone to the trouble of changing the physical locks on my door and filing complex legal paperwork to steal my property. But he had neglected to change the Wi-Fi router password. It was still the default factory setting printed on the sticker at the bottom of the device. Because of this profound laziness, I sat in my dingy motel room and watched a live stream of my apartment being destroyed. My phone had been buzzing all night. Mrs. Higgins from apartment 4B called me in a rage at 2 a.m. Elena, you have to make it stop, she hissed into the phone. The base is shaking my china cabinet. I thought you were a respectful girl. I am so sorry, Mrs. Higgins, I replied, my voice dripping with false sympathy. I am dealing with a difficult family situation. Please call the police if it continues. I watched the security feed on my laptop. Julian was hosting what looked like a celebration of mediocrity. There were about 20 people crammed into my living room. I zoomed in on the coffee table, my vintage teak coffee table, and watched Julian chop lines of white powder with a credit card. He was laughing, his head thrown back, looking like a king. I hit the record button. Every frame of this debauchery was being saved directly to a cloud server he did not know existed. The next morning, the feed showed a different kind of horror. My parents arrived. The apartment was littered with red plastic cups and mysterious stains. But my parents walked in like they were entering the Palace of Versailles. I watched my mother pick up a discarded pizza box and smile at Julian as if he had just cured a disease. Look at you. Living the high life, my father said, his voice tinny through the microphone. You are a natural at this real estate game. Son. They were praising him for squatting in a home he did not pay for, funded by a loan he could not service. It was almost funny. Later that afternoon, I met them at a coffee shop 3 blocks away. I wore my oldest sweatshirt and let my hair look messy. I needed to look defeated. I sat down and placed my phone on the table, face down, with the voice recorder app running. You look terrible, my mother said as she sat down, adjusting her silk scarf. Have you not been sleeping? It is hard to sleep in a motel that charges $40 a night, I said quietly. I looked at my father. Dad, I saw the transfer papers, the signature on the deed. It looks exactly like mine. My father waved his hand dismissively, avoiding my gaze. Oh, that. Well, the notary was in a rush, and you were halfway across the world. I just signed it to help. To speed things up, it is basically the same thing as the power of attorney. Don't get hung up on technicalities. Elena. I mentally checked a box. Admission of forgery. I am really struggling, I said, letting my voice crack. I have no cash. My accounts are frozen because of the investigation I had to trigger with the bank. Can you lend me $5,000 just so I can put a deposit on a rental? My mother recoiled as if I had asked her to sell a kidney. $5,000, she exclaimed. Elena, be reasonable. All our liquidity is tied up in Julian's new venture. He is on the verge of a massive breakthrough with this crypto project. We cannot pull capital out now. So you gave him my house. You let him mortgage it for $500,000, and you cannot spare $5,000 for me to have a roof over my head, I asked, staring at them. My mother sighed, a long, dramatic exhale of a martyr. She reached across the table and patted my hand condescendingly. Elena, try to understand, she said softly. You are a girl. Girls do not need big penthouses or empires. Eventually, you will find a nice husband, and he will provide a home for you. But Julian is a man. He needs a launch pad. He needs assets to build his legacy. It is just the way the world works. I looked at her, memorizing the cruelty in her eyes. A launch pad, I repeated. Exactly, my father added, checking his watch. Now, why don't you go back to the contractors, pick up a few extra shifts? You are strong, Elena. You can handle the rough stuff. Julian is more delicate. I watched them leave, sticking the bill for the coffee with me. I stopped the recording and saved the file. They thought Julian needed a launch pad. I was about to turn it into an ejection seat. War had a way of stripping relationships down to their barest essentials, and my dynamic with Marcus was shifting from professional camaraderie to something deeper. We spent long nights in his office, surrounded by stacks of case law and takeout containers. He did not look at me with pity. He looked at me with the same steady, reassuring gaze he used to have when we were pinned down by enemy fire. He understood that this legal battle was not about money. It was about reclaiming my dignity. Elena, Marcus said one evening, his voice dropping an octave as he leaned closer to me. I found something else. It is worse than the bank fraud. I looked up from my laptop. What could be worse than a fraudulent $500,000 mortgage, a secondary loan? Marcus replied, sliding a photocopy across the desk. Julian used the deed as collateral for a hard money loan, $50,000 at 40% interest. These aren't banks, Elena. These are sharks. If he defaults, they don't send letters. They send guys with baseball bats. My stomach tightened. Julian was not just drowning, he was dragging my life down with him. The next morning, the consequences of his incompetence arrived in my hands because I had set up mail forwarding to my temporary address. I received the notices meant for the penthouse. First, there was a notice of default from the bank. Julian had not made a single payment on the mortgage he stole. Second, and more immediately useful, was a certified letter from the Homeowners Association. It was a summons for a disciplinary hearing regarding repeated noise violations and illegal subletting activities. The hearing was tonight. I walked into the community room of my building at 7 o'clock sharp. The board members, my old neighbors whom I had baked cookies for, sat behind a long table. Julian was standing at the podium, wearing a suit that was too tight, waving his hands aggressively. "These complaints are ridiculous," Julian shouted. "I am an entrepreneur. I have high-profile clients over for meetings. You people are just... You are just jealous of my success." I pushed open the double doors. Actually, they are tired of the smell of weed and cheap cologne. Julian. The room went silent. Julian spun around, his face draining of color. "What are you doing here?" he stammered, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Yeah, you! You are trespassing. Get out, I am the owner." "No, you are not," I said, my voice calm and carrying to the back of the room. I walked to the table and placed the Phoenix Trust documents in front of the board president. Mrs. Gable. Mrs. Gable. As you can see here, the title transfer to Julian was executed based on a forged signature. The property belongs to the Phoenix Trust. I am the sole trustee. Julian is an unauthorized squatter engaging in criminal fraud. Mrs. Gable adjusted her glasses and read the document. She looked up at Julian, her expression hardening. Is this true? Julian, she asked. She is lying. Julian screamed, sweat beading on his forehead. Mom and Dad said, they said it was legal. You can't listen to her. We have security footage of you damaging the elevators and bringing in illicit substances. Mrs. Gable said coldly. We also have the logbooks. Elena, the board recognizes you as the rightful resident. We will provide whatever evidence you need for the police. Julian looked around the room, realizing he had no allies. He pulled out his phone, his hands trembling violently. I'm calling Dad. You're dead. Elena, you hear me? You're dead. He ran out of the room like a frightened child. I turned to Marcus, who was standing by the door. He nodded. We had one more move to make before the night was over. While Julian was crying to our parents, Marcus filed a lis pendens electronically with the county recorder's office. It was a formal notice of pending legal action concerning the property. It meant the title was now clouded. Julian could not sell the apartment. He could not refinance it. He could not even give it away. The asset was frozen solid. We had locked him in the cage he built for himself. Now, we just had to watch him panic. The legal system is a slow-moving beast, but when it finally snaps its jaws shut, the sound is deafening. The lis pendens Marcus filed was the first domino. Within 24 hours, the cash buyer Julian had lined up vanished. No investor in their right mind would touch a property with a clouded title. Julian was left holding a stolen asset he could not liquidate, while the hard money lenders, the sharks who had loaned him $50,000 at 40% interest, began to circle. They did not send letters. They sent men in black SUVs who sat idling outside the lobby, watching the doors. Simultaneously, the bank reacted to Marcus's fraud packet with terrifying speed. They froze the remaining funds in the home equity line of credit and issued an immediate demand for repayment of the principal. They also flagged the account for suspicious activity, triggering an internal investigation into the notary who had supposedly witnessed my signature. The pressure cooker exploded on a Tuesday morning. My parents received their service of process. It was not a polite request for a meeting. It was a federal summons for wire fraud, bank fraud, and aggravated identity theft. An hour later, I heard pounding on the door of my motel room. Elena, open this door right now, my father roared from the hallway. I looked through the peephole. My parents were standing there, their faces twisted in a mixture of rage and panic. My mother was sobbing, hammering on the wood with her fist. How could you do this? She screamed, her voice cracking. We are your parents. You are sending us to prison over an apartment. You ungrateful, heartless witch. Open the door. I did not open the door. I sat on the bed and dialed 911. I am at the Motel 6 off the highway, I told the dispatcher calmly. There are 2 individuals attempting to break into my room. I have a protective order pending. I fear for my safety. I listened to them scream for 5 more minutes. They were not sorry. They were not asking for forgiveness. They were furious that their tool had stopped working. When the sirens wailed in the distance, they scrambled down the hallway, fleeing like roaches when the lights turn on. The police report filed that day would be Exhibit B in their sentencing hearing. Meanwhile, across town, Julian's world was crumbling even faster. I watched the security feed from my laptop. His girlfriend, the Instagram model who had sneered at me in the lobby, was packing a suitcase. Where are you going? Julian pleaded, following her into the bedroom. Babe, it is just a temporary cash flow issue. I can fix this. You are broke, Julian, she spat, zipping up her bag. And you are a liar. The doorman told me the cops were here looking for you earlier. I am not going to jail for being your accessory. She grabbed my jewelry box from the dresser, the one containing my grandmother's pearls, and shoved it into her purse. Hey, that is mine, Julian shouted. Consider it severance pay for putting up with you, she replied, and then she walked out the door, leaving him alone in the silence of the apartment he could no longer afford. Something inside Julian snapped. I saw it happen. His shoulders slumped, and then he let out a guttural scream that the microphone barely picked up. He grabbed a golf club from the corner of the room, a driver I had bought myself as a promotion gift, and swung it at the 60-inch television. Smash! The screen shattered. "If I can't have it," Julian muttered, his eyes wild and unfocused. "If I can't have it, nobody can." He swung again, hitting the glass coffee table. He ripped the curtains off the rods. He took a knife from the kitchen and slashed the Italian leather sofa. I watched in horror as he destroyed everything I had worked 10 years to build. My sanctuary was being reduced to splinters and rags. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. "He is destroying everything. Marcus, he is ruining it." Ah! Marcus leaned over my shoulder, watching the screen with a grim satisfaction. He placed a hand on my arm. "Let him do it, Elena," Marcus said softly. "Every swing of that club is another felony charge. It is malicious destruction of property, and since he is not the owner, the insurance covers vandalism by an intruder. We will get brand new furniture. But Julian, he is digging a hole so deep he will not see sunlight for a decade." I wiped my eyes and watched. Marcus was right. Julian thought he was hurting me, but he was only sealing his own fate. The deposition room at Stratton and Associates was kept at a freezing 68 degrees. My parents sat on the opposite side of the mahogany table, flanked by a court-appointed attorney named Mr. Henderson, who looked as if he had graduated from law school the previous week. He was sweating profusely despite the air conditioning. "Let us be reasonable," Mr. Henderson said, shuffling his papers nervously. "So, this is clearly a domestic misunderstanding. My clients believed the power of attorney gave them broad rights to manage the family estate. The intent was never to defraud. It was to streamline assets." Marcus sat next to me, looking like a shark smelling blood in the water. He did not smile. He simply slid a thick binder across the table. "Mr. Henderson, intent is irrelevant when the act itself is a felony," Marcus said smoothly. "But since you brought it up, let us discuss the timeline." Marcus opened the binder to Exhibit C. It was a blown-up image of the signature on the deed transfer document dated June 14th. Next to it was a forensic report from a handwriting expert. Our expert confirmed that while this signature bears a superficial resemblance to Elena's, the pressure points indicate it was drawn, not written. Marcus continued, "But the real problem for your clients is Exhibit D." He flipped the page. It was a copy of my passport, highlighting a stamp from German customs. On June 14th, the day this document was notarized in Virginia, Elena was on a layover at Ramstein Air Base in Germany, Marcus said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Unless she has the ability to teleport, she did not sign that deed." The silence in the room was heavy and suffocating. My father stared at the passport copy, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. He loosened his tie, his hand shaking. I practiced," my father whispered, his voice barely audible. "Excuse me," Marcus asked. "I practiced," my father shouted suddenly, slamming his hand on the table. Tears streamed down his face. "I spent 2 weeks tracing her old report cards. I just wanted it to look authentic so the bank wouldn't ask questions. We needed the money. Julian needed the money." The court reporter typed furiously. "Mr. Henderson put his head in his hands. It was over. My father had just confessed to federal forgery on the record, before anyone could react. The door to the conference room opened. 2 officers from the Arlington Police Department stepped in, followed by a detective. They were not looking at my father. They were looking at Julian, who was sitting in the corner playing on his phone. "Julian Vance?" the detective asked. "Yeah." Julian looked up, annoyed. "You are under arrest for wire fraud and operating a fraudulent shell company," the detective stated, pulling out handcuffs. "We found evidence that you used the address of the penthouse to apply for small business relief loans for a company that does not exist." "What? No, I was going to start the business." Julian stammered as they hauled him up. "Mom, Dad, do something. They are hurting me." As the police dragged Julian out, screaming about his rights, my mother collapsed to the floor. She crawled toward me, grabbing the hem of my pants. "Elena, please." She wailed, her mascara running down her cheeks. "He is your brother. He is just a boy. Withdraw the lawsuit. Tell them it was a mistake. We already liquidated our entire retirement fund to pay for his bail on the first charge. We have nothing left. If you pursue this, you destroy us all." I looked down at her. I felt nothing. No pity. No anger. Just a vast, empty indifference. "You spent your retirement fund," I asked. "Every penny." She sobbed. 40 years of savings. Gone. Please, Elena, you have to sacrifice for family." I pulled my leg away from her grasp and stood up. "Do you remember what you told me when I called you from the airport?" I asked, looking her dead in the eye. "You told me I had to sacrifice because Julian needed a start." Well, here is his start. Julian is going to sacrifice his freedom to pay for your greed. You are a monster," she hissed, her sorrow turning instantly to venom. "No," I replied, gathering my files. "I am just the bill collector, and you are past due." I turned to Marcus. "No settlement. I want this to go to trial. I want the verdict to be public record." We walked out of the room, leaving my parents weeping over the ruins of the life they had destroyed with their own hands. I returned to the penthouse with a police escort to oversee the formal eviction enforcement. The officer, a kind man named Sergeant Miller, pushed open the door with his gloved hand, clearly expecting me to break down. The apartment was a carcass. The white walls were smeared with grease and what looked like red wine. My furniture, selected with such care from catalogs I had studied for months while deployed, was reduced to expensive kindling. The air smelled of stale beer, unwashed bodies, and rotting food. "I am sorry, Ms. Vance," Sergeant Miller said, shaking his head. "We can get a crime scene cleanup crew in here by tomorrow morning." I stepped over a shattered vase. I looked at the destruction, waiting for the anger to rise, but it did not come. Instead, a strange, cool wave of relief washed over me. For so long, I had conflated this apartment with my self-worth. I thought that if I lost this place, I lost myself. But standing there amidst the wreckage, I realized that these were just things. They were wood, glass, and fabric. I was still standing. I was still the woman who had survived mortar attacks and betrayal. I could buy new furniture. I could paint the walls. The rot was not in the building. The rot was in my family, and I had finally excised it. "It is okay, Sergeant," I said softly. "It is just stuff. Seal it up." But the war was not over. Julian was out. My parents, in a final act of self-destructive enabling, had sold both of their cars, my father's sedan and my mother's SUV, to a used car lot for quick cash. They used every cent to pay the 10% premium to a bail bondsman to get Julian out while he awaited trial. They truly believed that if he was free, he could somehow fix this. They did not understand that a drowning man will climb on top of his rescuers to breathe. That afternoon, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I almost sent it to voicemail, but my instinct told me to answer. "Elena." The voice was hesitant. "This is Kyle. I used to hang out with Julian." I remembered Kyle. He was a decent kid whom Julian had convinced to invest $5,000 in a non-existent sneaker resale business 3 years ago. Julian had ghosted him immediately after taking the money. "I am listening, Kyle," I said. "Look, I know we aren't friends." Kyle stammered, his voice trembling. "But I just saw Julian at the gas station on Route 7. He looked manic. Elena, He was filling up 3 large jerry cans with gasoline. He kept muttering to himself. I heard him say, "He said if he can't live there, no one will." My blood ran cold. Julian was not planning to flee. He was planning a scorched earth retreat. He was going to burn the building down to destroy the evidence of his fraud and punish me for winning. "Thank you, Kyle," I said. "You just saved lives." I called Marcus immediately. We did not go to the apartment. We went to the police. We set up a perimeter in the underground parking garage, the only access point Julian could use without passing the doorman. It was 2 in the morning. The garage was a cavern of concrete and shadows. I crouched behind a concrete pillar near the elevator bank, my heart hammering against my ribs. Marcus was beside me, his presence solid and grounding. He reached out and took my hand, his thumb tracing the knuckles. "You do not have to be the soldier tonight, Elena," Marcus whispered, his dark eyes locking onto mine. "We have units at every exit. You have done enough." "I spent my whole life fighting battles alone," I whispered back, squeezing his hand. "I don't know how to stop." "Then let me teach you," Marcus replied. "We finish this, and then we build something new. Together." For the first time in my life, the future did not look like a lonely uphill climb. It looked like a partnership. Suddenly, the heavy metal door of the stairwell creaked open. The sound echoed through the silent garage like a gunshot. Julian stepped out. He looked like a wraith. His clothes were disheveled, his eyes wide and bloodshot, vibrating with a terrifying, drug-fueled energy. In his right hand, he clutched a red plastic gas can. In his left, he held a silver lighter. He did not look like my brother anymore. He looked like the manifestation of every toxic impulse my parents had nurtured for 30 years. He took a step toward my parked Range Rover, his thumb hovering over the flint of the lighter. The chemical stench of gasoline filled the underground garage, thick enough to taste. Julian stood by my silver Range Rover, the one purchase I had allowed myself after the contract in Kabul, and upended a red jerry can over the hood. The liquid splashed onto the concrete, soaking his designer shoes. But he did not seem to notice. He looked deranged, his eyes wide and vibrating with a manic, drug-fueled energy. "Elena," he screamed, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "I know you are watching. Come out, or I light the match." "Police, drop it," Sergeant Miller shouted, stepping out from behind a support pillar with his weapon drawn. 3 other officers emerged from the shadows, their service weapons trained on Julian's chest. Julian did not drop the lighter. Instead, he flicked the lid open. The flame sparked to life, a tiny, terrifying orange dancer in the gloom. He held it inches above the fume-soaked hood of my car. "Back off!" Julian shrieked, his hand shaking so hard the flame wavered. I swear to God I will do it. I will burn this whole place down. If I go down, everyone goes down." "Julian, do not do this," Miller said, his voice level and calm. "Put the lighter down. We can talk." "No more talking," Julian yelled, tears streaming down his face. "She took everything, my house, my money, my life. It is all her fault." I stepped out from behind the concrete pillar. Marcus reached out to grab my arm, his eyes wide with panic, but I shook him off. I walked past the line of police officers until I was 20 feet away from my brother. I did not raise my hands. I did not plead. I stood with the posture I had learned in the military, spine straight, chin up, radiating a cold, absolute control. "It is not my fault, Julian," I said. My voice was not loud, but it cut through the tension like a knife. "Shut up," Julian screamed, swinging the lighter wildly. You ruined me. You were supposed to help me. Look at yourself," I said, taking a step forward. "You are standing in a puddle of gasoline, holding a lighter, crying like a toddler. You want to know the truth. You are a failure, Julian. But you are not a failure because I didn't help you. You are a failure because you never bothered to grow up. Julian froze, his mouth opening and closing. Mom and Dad did not love you, I continued, my words landing like physical blows. They crippled you. They destroyed you with their pampering. They taught you that you could steal and lie and never pay the price. Well, the bill is due, Julian, and you are the one who has to pay it. I hate you, Julian roared, his face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. He pulled his arm back to throw the lighter directly at me. No, Marcus shouted, before I could react. Marcus lunged from behind me. He tackled me to the cold concrete, shielding my body with his own. The movement startled Julian. He flinched, and for a split second his aim faltered. The lighter tumbled from his hand, skittering across the floor but landing just inches away from the pool of gasoline. Go, 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 Miller shouted. The officers swarmed him. 2 of them hit Julian at full speed, driving him into the side of my car. The impact left a dent in the door, but I did not care. They wrestled him to the ground, pulling his arms behind his back as he thrashed and screamed obscenities. Get off me, my dad is going to sue you. I can't breathe, Julian yelled, his face pressed against the gasoline-stained floor. Julian Vance, you are under arrest for attempted arson and attempted murder, Miller recited, snapping the handcuffs shut. At that moment, the elevator doors slid open. My parents rushed out, breathless and frantic. They had evidently been calling Julian's phone and had rushed over when the doorman told them the police were in the garage. They stopped dead when they saw their golden son pinned to the ground, reeking of fuel, with metal cuffs on his wrists. Julian, my mother screamed, a sound of pure anguish. She tried to run to him, but an officer blocked her path. She collapsed into my father's arms, her legs giving out. My father stood there, staring at his son. His face was pale, his mouth agape. He looked from the gasoline on the floor to the handcuffs, and finally, the reality of what his indulgence had created crashed down on him. He looked old. He looked broken. I stood up, brushing the grit off my pants. Marcus stood beside me, his hand resting protectively on my shoulder. I looked at my parents, then at Julian being dragged toward the squad car. I waited for the guilt. I waited for the sadness. But as I watched the flashing blue lights illuminate the garage, I realized I felt absolutely nothing. No tears, no regret. The toxic cord that had tethered me to them for 32 years had finally, mercifully, snapped. 6 months later, the gavel hit the woodblock with a sound that felt like finality. The courtroom was silent as the judge delivered the sentence. Julian stood in his orange jumpsuit, trembling slightly. He looked smaller than I remembered, stripped of his bravado and his designer clothes. The judge did not mince words, calling Julian a danger to the community and a parasite who had preyed on his own blood. The sentence was 8 years in federal prison for wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and attempted arson when the bailiffs led him away. He looked at the gallery, his eyes searching for someone to save him, but there was no one left. My parents avoided prison time, receiving 5 years of probation, but the court imposed a restitution fine so heavy it wiped out whatever assets they had managed to hide. More importantly, their social currency was bankrupt. In their tight-knit country club community, they were now pariahs, known forever as the people who raised a felon and tried to rob their veteran daughter. The civil victory was even sweeter. The judge ruled that since the mortgage was obtained through clear forgery and fraud, the lien on the Phoenix Trust was void. The bank was furious, but they could not touch my property. They had to pursue Julian and my parents for the outstanding $500,000. I walked out of that courthouse with the deed to my penthouse fully restored and unencumbered. Yet, When I returned to the apartment, the victory felt hollow. I walked through the empty rooms, the walls freshly painted to hide the smoke damage, and realized this place was a monument to a war I was tired of fighting. It held too many ghosts. I listed it for sale the next day. The market was hot, and it sold within a week. I took the proceeds and bought a sprawling, quiet villa in the suburbs, surrounded by oak trees and silence. It was a place for peace, not status. I did not retire. Instead, I found a new mission. Marcus and I launched a boutique firm called Vance and Stratton Security. We specialize in financial forensics and asset protection for women navigating high-conflict divorces or toxic family disputes. We teach them how to bulletproof their lives just like I did. Every time we help a client secure her future, I feel a little more healed. Last Saturday, Marcus and I were painting the living room of the new house. He had a smudge of sage green paint on his nose. He put down his roller, wiped his hands on a rag, and looked at me with an intensity that made my heart skip a beat. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple, elegant gold band. He did not make a grand speech. He just asked if I wanted to build a life with him where no one gets left behind. I said yes before he could even finish the sentence. My parents tried to breach the wall one last time. My mother sent an email yesterday, bypassing my spam filter, claiming they were destitute and asking for a monthly allowance for their old age. She talked about duty and family. I did not write back a long, emotional letter. I simply replied with a PDF list of state-funded nursing homes and blocked their email address permanently. They had invested their entire future in Julian. They could live with the return on that investment. This morning, a letter arrived from the correctional facility. The handwriting was jagged. I opened it and read the first line. "It is not fair. Elena, I was just trying to make you proud." He was still doing it. He was still the victim. I did not read the rest. I walked to the fire pit in the backyard and tossed the letter into the flames. I watched the paper curl, turn black, and disintegrate into ash. Now, I am sitting on my porch steps. The sun is setting, painting the Virginia sky in shades of violet and gold. I am holding a glass of the same vintage wine Julian had opened that first night. It tastes rich and complex. I take a sip and close my eyes, listening to the wind in the trees. I am not a scapegoat anymore. I am not a resource. I am Elena, and for the first time in my life, I am truly, completely free. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please comment below and let me know where you are tuning in from to share your thoughts. I would love to hear from you. Don't forget to subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach more people.